A masked maniac haunts the cavernous and maze-like rooms and corridors of an Italian opera house in Dario Argento's 1987 opulent horror film, Opera.
You are invited to enjoy an evening of terror.
On this channel previously I have covered several Dario Argento films, specifically The Card Player, Giallo and Dark Glasses, and I've considered several times to cover Opera, but each time up until now I thought better of it because I personally find Opera to be a challenging film on several levels. I think it's both structurally and narratively less audience friendly than some of Dario Argento's perhaps more celebrated films, and I will go into this a bit more in depth in this review. So welcome to my channel. This is my review of Dario Argento's Opera. Usually films live and die by the characters. Nominally at least, the protagonist of Opera is Betty, this young opera singer who is an understudy, and she shoots to fame overnight when the diva Mara Chikova has an accident, and that very night Betty has her first chance to take center stage at the opera, singing in Giuseppe Verdi's Macbeth. Thus begins the tale, which is a prime example of Dario Argento going style over substance and emptying his entire bag of tricks over us. A substantially budgeted film, perhaps Dario Argento's most expensive film to date. Opera is very easy on the eyes, opulent. When it came out, it was technically one of the most daring and perfectly assembled European films. However, when it comes to plot, it's the opposite of a tightly plotted narrative. Now, Dario Argento clearly made his mark early on, having crafted several Italian murder mysteries, and at least the first two of them were quite well constructed. By the time he rolled around to his third film, Four Flies on Grey Velvet, which was a big box office hit, Dario Argento had already begun to abandon the more traditional whodunit structure, and in that film, Four Flies on Grey Velvet, we already began to see him embrace more the flights of fancy and fall in love with extreme slow motion effects and dazzling displays of style, oftentimes at the expense of overall story coherence. And Four Flies on Grey Velvet was the first, one could say the first film where Dario Argento started branching out away from pure murder mystery towards a more abstract, general horror and thriller genre. And when it comes to opera, some of the things we saw originally in Four Flies make a comeback in opera. For example, a slow motion bullet time before CGI first originates in Four Flies on Grey Velvet, and we see a technical improvement on that scene in opera when a character has a bullet fired into her eye through the door, through the spy hole. That slow motion shot must have left audiences speechless when the film opened, and it still looks pretty mind-blowing nowadays. Generally, Opera is one of the most self-referential Dario Argento films, in which he literally recycles all his finest approaches, all his finest set pieces, and refines them on a bigger budget. It would be a very long list, but I'll just... In the film Inferno, we have Kazanian gleefully gathering cats with an intention to go and drown them, and he seems to be cackling and really has his fun torturing and hurting those animals. In opera, we have the maniac, for no good reason, attacks several crows or ravens with his knife. And it also seems to be done out of pure sadism rather than in self-defense. Then we see a shot from above, from the window, looking down at an illuminated phone box in the street, which is very similar to a moment in the 1982 film Tenebrae. Both Tenebrae and opera feature exchanges between the cops and the creative people on the nature of the relationship. When does reality begin to imitate fiction, and what exactly is the distinction between reality and fiction? So that discourse is continued in opera. We might remember the dazzling crane shots flying up from the street level to the windows in Deep Red, and there is a similar shot in opera, but rendered even more smooth with newer technology. And Argento planting a version of himself within the fictional story also takes on new proportions in opera, where there is a character of Mark, a filmmaker who is a stand-in for Dario Argento himself. And this is one of the more interesting characters in opera, because he's outwardly a very quiet person, yet his style is flamboyant and violent, and he exerts a lot of authority on the people around him, including Betty. Now, there is an abortive sort of romance between Mark and Betty, and at some point one could say that there is also a transference, that Dario Argento seems to switch his authorial focus from Mark to Betty, and by the end of the film it seems that Betty becomes Dario Argento's mouthpiece. Another moment which can be seen as self-referential would be the whole finale, which is much criticized, and I personally really like it. It's the return to the green mountainous areas of Switzerland, which is a definite callback to the film Phenomena, Creepers. Another thing repeated from Phenomena is the character pulling an analog telephone by the cord, by the cable, to reach it to make a phone call. Each Dario Argento film from Four Flies onwards contains a slow motion shot, hypnotic shot of smashing glass, or in any case a shattered mirror or a glass in some form, and there is that in opera as well. So let's talk about the lead character, Betty, a little bit. She isn't exactly your proactive or a resourceful, tough girl. She's in fact quite the opposite. She's first introduced in bed, listening to music, seems to be permanently on the receiving end of things. It's a astonishingly passive, reactive character. She receives a phone call from, we'll later find out, from the murderer, telling her that she is to make her debut in Macbeth that very night, and soon all her friends and superiors descend upon her and browbeat her into taking over the part from Mara Chikova, the diva who just suffered a sudden accident and cannot perform. Betty would have been ecstatic had she been a traditional character who has worked hard as an understudy, and she, like Rocky, having his chance at stardom by fighting Apollo Creed. She's nothing like that, though. She's reluctant. She says, oh, my voice is not right, I'm too young. So she's generally reluctant to take on this important part until her superiors basically force her to. And later, as she does perform and the house is filled with thunderous applause, she has made the audience fall in love with her performance. She seems on the verge of collapse rather than being jubilant. So this is a character who's full of insecurities, a character who's never seemingly at ease, in fact looking freaked out seems to be the main form of acting for this actor as Betty. She always looks disturbed or in some way inhibited. So it's definitely in some ways a perhaps a traumatized character, and there is further down the line we will learn there is a family trauma which I cannot reveal here because that would be a bit of a spoiler for those who are unfamiliar with the film Opera. Another important character would be Mira, played by Daria Nicolodi, who seems to be Betty's only friend in the cutthroat showbiz of the Italian opera, and Mira seems to be like this older, wiser friend who's there for her even when it comes to surviving an assault from the maniac. So Mira is a character who is the only ray of light seemingly in Betty's life, even though it's not quite clear if Mira's intentions are genuinely friendly or perhaps she has some kind of monetary gain in this. We never really find out the exact nature of their relationship. There are characters who I wish had been more prominent in the film, such as the film's first proper victim, played by William McNamara, who plays Betty's stage manager, sometime boyfriend. It has to be said that the first murder in opera comes quite a long way into the film, like the first spectacular murder. What sets opera apart from a lot of Dario Argento films is that the first person killed on screen is in fact just a throwaway character, almost an extra, and the scene happens during Betty's performance. So our attention as audience is actually split between the spectacular stage action with Betty singing Macbeth, and then we are cutting between her and the violent demise of an usher who gets murdered in a strange way in one of the boxes. When the killer is discovered by the usher in one of the boxes, the usher confronts him and receives he seems to be impaled on like a hook, a metal hook, probably like a coat hanger mounted to the wall, which is an improbable death. A lot of the time, a murder in a Dario Argento film, especially the opening one, is ritualized and is usually the central spectacle, whereas in opera, atypically, it seems to be vying for attention. It seems to be not the central spectacle, but just one of the many exciting things going on. And it also comes just after a strange flashback. It's one of those intrusive flashbacks, which we've seen many times in Dario Argento films, including Deep Red and Sleepless, a flashback seemingly to the maniac's earlier days. When it comes to the style of this film, it's almost claustrophobic, and a lot of opera is shot on sound stages and within the actual opera house in Parma, Italy. So it's a film deliberately flaunting its artifice. It almost reminded me at times of Fassbinder's film Carel, which is also shot on blatantly artificial sets where the sun is clearly not real sunlight but some kind of a projector just off camera. The world of opera is quite claustrophobic. We barely leave the interiors. We're a couple of times in the sun, in like the rain-drenched street, and then the final few minutes are in Switzerland, and they feel like a breath of fresh air after being inside the opera house and those changing rooms for so long. The first proper murder, as I mentioned, happens around minute 30, and that's William McNamara's character getting brutally murdered. I will speak about this murder a bit more at length because to me it seems to be also a departure from Argento's more usual style. Now, how does the murder of William McNamara stick out? I would say it's the first murder in a Dario Argento film which feels Americanized in a way, because it seems more like butchery than any kind of stylized act. It's overwhelmingly bloody, and it's taken to such an over-the-top excess that at some point it becomes almost like a caricature of a film. And it's also set to metal music, which sounds not like genuine metal, but more like somebody making a cover version of a metal track. And this gives the scene a strange distancing effect, which I'm not sure if that was intentional, but I'll give Dario Argento the benefit of the doubt. So opera has these many levels of distancing. Everything seems to be not quite real. Everything seems to be an echo of something else. So William McNamara's murder is also the first time we see the killer's unusual way of getting Betty to become a spectator in these murders. So I've already touched on Betty's passivity, and it is further emphasized when the killer, in reality what he does is he creeps up on her and immobilizes her by usually tying her down with a length of rope in an upright position and sticking needles attached to adhesive tape under her eyes so that she cannot shut her eyes, and thus she is forced to be a spectator of the killer's grisly method of dispatching her loved ones and her friends. And William McNamara's murder is one such act where he walks into the room and gets a knife basically stuck into his lower jaw, which is quite a spectacular effect. And then he is repeatedly stabbed with the killer's strange spade-shaped blade. It's some kind of a custom knife. And Betty is forced to watch this protracted murder whilst she's herself tied to a pillar in the middle of the room. And what happens next is all the more puzzling, is that Betty is then freed by the maniac. He slashes her bonds and escapes, and then she leaves the scene of the crime, makes an anonymous call to the cops to report what happened, and then she is wandering through the rain in a beautiful, stylish sequence until a car stops and Mark, the director, picks her up. And the scene that follows is almost like something from Suspiria, with this rain-drenched car interior, except there is quite a lot of dialogue, and it's Betty lamenting her non-existent sex life to Mark, rather than telling him about having just seen her boyfriend butchered. She actually somehow skirts that issue and talks about completely her own inner struggles with Mark, which is a scene which, it really depends. It can make or break the film for you. It's definitely not your usual logic, but it's also a trademark Dario Argento moment where we're in his dream universe. And this is where you either disengage from the narrative completely in disbelief, or you choose to go along with it. And this is where opera becomes a delightful film, especially for those who appreciate also the technical intricacy of the many more spectacular murders to come. I will leave my review at this point, and I would love to hear your comments on Dario Argento's opera, whether you know this film and how do you rate it. Thank you very much for listening.